Chris Camacho and Chris Mackey, can you see the Q&A screens? Okay.
Is that or do you mean the Zoom webinar chat?
No, there's actually a separate Q&A question. It should be on the bottom of your screen. It actually says Q&A.
Yep, got it.
Okay.
It looks like we have half the participants logged in. So.
Okay. Well, I think then we'll go ahead and get started, knowing that hopefully some people will join us here shortly. So I guess I'll welcome everybody. Welcome to the Lambda Alpha International webinar. We're really excited today to have Chris Camacho and Chris Mackey joining us to talk about the 202 and other associated.
Did we lose it?
If you're not familiar with Lambda Alpha International, it's a land economics organization.
Well, we just lost Scott. Well, on that note, why don't we go ahead and move over to you, Loretta, and let you tell us a little bit about Cardno, and thank you very much for sponsoring our webinar today.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry we lost Scott, but I did say I am a member of LAI, and I would just encourage anyone to look online at the benefits and the programming for becoming a member, because it's a great organization to belong to. So while this slide is up, I'll just talk really quickly. I want to say I'm really proud to be able to sponsor this event. I know Chris and Chris for a while, and this is just a really good program today. Just from looking at this slide, you can see Cardno is a civil engineering and environmental firm. A lot of people don't know us, but we've been around 75 years. We're global, so we're pretty much all over. The United States, the Americas, has 120 offices. In Arizona, we do site civil engineering. We do environmental phase ones for home builders, commercial development, and some of the municipalities. So I'm really happy to present Cardno to this audience and to sponsor this event. So if you're in need for a civil engineer, just give me a call.
Thank you, Loretta. I appreciate that.
I know Scott had some questions. I don't have those. That wasn't something to share. So I don't know if, Chris, you want to just start? Maybe you can tell, I'm sure everybody knows who you are. So I don't know briefly what Scott had prepared. Welcome.
Great. We'll just take over. Chris and I are used to working on the fly, so we'll just take over and go from here. So I'm Chris Mackey. I am the Director of Community and Economic Development for the City of Phoenix. Been here my whole life, long-time economic developer, and before that in commercial real estate. With me is Chris Camacho. Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Camacho, President and CEO of GPEC. Been fortunate to be in Arizona for the last 16 years and have seen quite a bit of change here, and look forward to continuing to support all of our communities through the COVID recovery. And just say Chris is doing an extraordinary job at the City of Phoenix, and look forward to talking about what's the next chapter for this particular freeway corridor.
With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So Chris and I are going to talk to you today about the South Mountain Technology Corridor. It is the newest freeway segment that opened in December. It is about 24 miles of freeway. Let's see if it's going to let me take control here. Hang on one second. Come on. There we go. So it is about 24 miles of new freeway. Oh, now it's going to go ahead of me. Hang on. It has to catch up. Once we get the hang, we'll be in really good shape. So it is 24 miles of freeway, all in the city of Phoenix. The southernmost alignment that kind of runs to the southern side of Ahwatukee is, for the most part, built out residential development. You'll still see some commercial development that comes more towards the avenue side of the 202. But on the Gila River Indian community, you'll start to see some business parks and other things come along that side. For the city of Phoenix, where Chris and I are going to mostly talk to you about today, is going to be on the western alignment. So once you make the curve of South Mountain, heading to the north and up, certainly up to the 10, but absolutely up to the river bottom. So it opened to traffic on December 21st, and it was crazy. It was almost, this is my fourth freeway working on to open, and it kind of followed like all the others did. It was like every broker and developer and a business woke up on Christmas morning and went, oh my gosh, there's a freeway there. Nobody really paid much attention to it, kind of like the 202 through the Southeast Valley when it was built. And it's been tremendously popular ever since. I'm going to try not to, I'm a quick clicker, and so I'm going to try to make it so that it goes like it's supposed to. So as we were getting ready for development, it was really important to the city of Phoenix that we strongly focused on how that freeway would lay out. And the reason that that was important was we knew this was going to be an incredible economic engine at ultimate build out. And if you don't pay attention to the details early on, you've really missed a lot of opportunity in the future. So as the freeway was being built, we were paying attention to getting sleeves under the 202 as it was under construction, areas where ADOT had put in a movement from the arterials across the freeway. We wanted them to be elevated so you could see, worked really closely, and ADOT was a great partner, and Connect 202 as we built this freeway, making changes for us on the fly. Economic development came in and started kind of working with planning and development, making sure that we had a great freeway that was going to be built to be a great, kind of a great employment corridor at the end. I really want to shout out to MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments. They were a really strong partner of the city and ADOT in the planning for the freeway, but also once it was under construction in making those changes to make sure that it really became what we wanted on a freeway side. We've started kind of working early on different items that we were working towards creating the arterial streets that would come up along the new 202. So as we were building, as many of you know, Kitchell is fully under construction with Levine Park Place, which is a power center at Baseline and the 202. We didn't want things to happen that the freeway finished and, now, we had 3 years of construction, and now we had all these challenges with moving forward with arterials being shut down as we finished construction on arterials once development started. So we work closely with Levine Park Place, with the Kitchell, with the city of Phoenix, and a number of the landowners in the area to go ahead and create a development agreement that allowed for everyone to invest in a Baseline kind of from 67th Avenue to 51st Avenue. So when the freeway finished, those streets were just done. We didn't have to come behind and tear them up in front of a power center or others. So we worked on a really collaborative agreement, and that really is the basis as we continue forward in development of the 202 that we'll be working on to create all that arterial activity. So southwest corner is open. You can see this was the ground opening of Sprouts, which normally doesn't draw the attention that it drew in Levine, but Levine was so happy to have their own Sprouts. And in conjunction with Sprouts, Harkins announced and others that are coming along with it. But that was really kind of a platform for us to set for future development in creating development agreements by which we can get arterial street infrastructure done pretty easily. In front of you here, you see that opening announcement, with the governor and the mayor and the governor of Gila River Indian Community in making the announcement of the freeway opening. So it is the Congressman Ed Pastor Freeway, and Congressman Pastor probably worked harder than anyone to ensure that the federal dollars flowed into Arizona for this particular freeway. But we here in the city of Phoenix have dubbed it the South Mountain Technology Corridor. So when you think of the West Valley, you tend to think of big box distribution, you think of logistics, you think of transportation, you think of kind of heavier manufacturing and other things. This corridor is a game changer for us. So this stretch of freeway will be more of a technology focus. This will be where the jobs that are, data center jobs and high-tech manufacturing jobs and advanced industry jobs, this 22-mile stretch of new freeway really does and will get the attention of those that make representations for companies that are making decisions. And we intend for this part of the freeway in the city of Phoenix and in economic development to be that technology hub and not be home. We love all of our wonderful big box distribution and our e-commerce community members. They're wonderful and we absolutely love them. But this is an area that's really identified for jobs generating on a different type of level. So as we look at those employment corridors that make up the city of Phoenix, you'll see that South Mountain Technology Corridor more on that southern end. And Chris will jump in and hang on as soon as we get to up just a little bit here. But really rarely does an economic development team get a chance to create a true employment corridor. And this is the third time I've had the pleasure of being able to do something like this. So this is an area that will connect the East Valley through the West Valley and through Southwest Phoenix to create that linkable hub that makes it so that a movement from our workforce and our companies is really relatively simple. So if you look at that freeway, this was said by the city of Phoenix in 2017 that this new 202 freeway offers a rare opportunity to create jobs in a truly vast employment corridor. And the city of Phoenix planning and others are going to hang on tight to this one and ensure that at ultimate build out, we will most likely see between 80 to 100,000 new jobs through this corridor. Chris, you want to take over this one?
Yeah, so just a few comments. First, I think you mentioned MAG, and MAG's a very important partner in all of this, where at the regional level, where we work with all 22 cities in the market. First and foremost, companies, as Chris is alluding to, tech companies, big manufacturing, they look at Phoenix as a market. So, dissimilar from some other places across the U.S. where you may find cities all competing with one another, the unification of the region enables us to go out and really market the market. So we induce marketing to ensure that we have the ability to talk to these companies about the market in its entirety. And why that's important is transportation corridors are like a bedrock of, think of a life cycle of a market. And so there are some corridors led by transportation networks that are at the end of their life cycle. And then the cities have to go in and figure out how do we, redevelop or create, other mechanisms, adaptive reuse, what other opportunities that may present themselves. But these are like virgin corridors, and we have to keep creating these corridors led by transportation or anchored by transportation that then manifest to become, these elite commerce corridors of the future. And I think that's what this particular corridor represents. Distinguishing this corridor, however, with like the PB 303 area, the 303 alignment that connects I-17, all the way down to I-10, that's another corridor of the last decade that's evolved that did not exist before, but yet the net result is massive amount of job creation in that West Valley corridor. Again, for economic developers like Chris and myself, having progressive partners like MAG and others that are looking at future corridors that give us the ability then to go out and sell to global companies really matters. And so as you can see here, and I deal with this all the time, my West Valley mayors, if any of them are on there, I hear this all the time. The commute pattern from west to east that occurs is massive in our region. So you see the bottleneck at I-10. This should ease up some of that. west to east in the morning commute. And we're hopeful that we'll see a recalibration or balancing of the jobs density across the region. And again, that's what these corridors afford us to do. And so again, the numbers that are listed here, particularly I would reference financial services is a sector that's had massive growth. The last few years, we've been one of the top regions for financial services job growth. A lot of that, the current employees are commuting from the west to central and west to east valley. And so I do think you are going to see a change as you have these transportation corridors evolve, where you'll see much more balance and ideally less congestion on our freeways.
So I think to Chris's point exactly, you've got more than 60% of the West Valley's workforce that goes east of I-17 to go to work every day. And kind of pre-pandemic, that was a 2.5 hour commute for them each day. So the 202 corridor and bringing in the right companies along there that are tapping into that ready-made workforce that's in the West Valley will get our citizens, at least an hour, hour and a half of their lives back every day. So what can we expect with the new Loop 202 and what's moving into the next direction? So this will be a corridor of advanced manufacturing, of corporate campuses, data centers, emerging and leading edge technologies, financial services, cyber technology, a lot of A&D. This will be a technology manufacturing corridor, and it is really set up to support that way. Chris, any other comments?
No, I do think some of the substantive national changes, and I see some of the Q&A that's already coming in. I sit on the International Advisory Council with Secretary Ross, for Secretary Ross, and there's 25 of us, many of the leading global aerospace companies, semiconductor companies, and others. And the enormity of interest in large landmass, organized with infrastructure commerce corridors are the new expected norm. And so as you look at global competition in 1980s, 90s, we saw a massive amount of shift to global locations that were lower cost and even hyper-regionalized product manufacturing to where the market where the markets were consuming the technology or products. You will see a likely resurgence of reshoring and insourcing. And so the more we're prepared, particularly I'm eyeballing the AMT sector, as well as corporate campuses, I think are going to be very different coming out of COVID, whereby we're having conversations with corporate America about this blend of definite home workers and definite alternative worker structure. And as a byproduct, I do think you're going to see massive corporate campuses still cited. But what I do believe across the United States, the trend will be they're going to centralize these campuses in a handful of areas instead of having this kind of massive decentralized set of business units in tier 3, tier 4 cost markets. Think of a Tulsa, El Paso, Huntsville locations into more centralized, large scale, albeit manufacturing or office uses. So good news for Greater Phoenix. This well positions us as we emerge from COVID when that time comes around the centralizing theme. And again, I think Chris is spot on about these particular areas of opportunity.
And one of the questions in the Q&A is, what's the zoning for the South Mountain Technology Corridor, and can we get a copy? I'll get one over to LAI so that they can share it out with you. So the zoning on the general plan calls for corporate campuses, light industrial, more general industrial, and then retail and residential that surround it. So we'll get that copy right over to everyone and get it posted up. So as we look at the west, more like West Phoenix that you would typically see, we see the freeway that's moving through this area and the corporate type users that are out there today. We see a lot of big box distribution. We see a lot of heavy manufacturing, as we talked about, and you can see the freeway that's moving right through this area. So you see larger parcels that are owned on either side. And as we continue south, you'll see even more that move through the area. So it is already a location that corporate entities have identified and are anxious to be a part of. It's always hard when it takes it a minute to, when you've got a picture, it takes it a minute to flash ahead. So if we look at that corridor, and you can see this kind of runs, if you look kind of, this is the river. So this would be the Salt River. And this area that's running all the way down along here is really the area of the South Mountain Technology Corridor that's of interest to us in economic development. So from baseline in 202, it is 6 miles to I-10, 11 miles to downtown Phoenix. You've got about 110,000 households in a 10-minute drive. There is a significant amount of SRP and water and wastewater infrastructure in the area. SRP really sees this as one of their prime focuses over the next 10 years for standing up infrastructure. Telecommunications, we've been working closely with all the big telecoms. They're either already in the area or have large expansions planned right through that area. I always love the lag between the pictures. So if we look at population, and this is kind of when people think of Levine, this is what they think of today. It's a lot of houses today. And what we're focusing on now is that jobs generating aspect and bringing in good quality jobs for the citizens that live out there. So you've seen an increase in population by nearly 30% in the last decade, and almost another 10% projected in the next 5 years. It's a really young workforce that has selected Levine in which to live. 40% are married with kids, and it's a more affluent area than we see in lots of other areas of Phoenix. So, it's a great portion of Levine are these really pretty little new areas. These are the types of buildings. So this is a representation of what we're looking for in that 202 corridor. So it is, again, smaller, 100, 200,000 square foot buildings, 50,000 square footers, kind of a pretty tilt panel with lots of gingerbread, lots of big landscape setback, heavy parked. Some of those buildings, we've got some groups that have purchased land, developers that have purchased land, and they're going spec in the area. What we've talked to them about is to do kind of the tweener buildings where they are flex tech buildings that might have a 28, 30 foot clear, so they could easily be mezzanine. If we deliver, back office, corporate office type tenants, they could easily be mezzanine and turn more into office buildings. But a lot of what we'd love to see in that area is more of the technology, manufacturing, and knowledge economy type jobs. Chris, anything to add?
Nope.
So as we're looking at that, what we're looking at is the creation of a knowledge campus and a really knowledge-focused business parks and corporate campuses, heavy landscaped, really attractive areas in which for people to be. We've been working closely. I've been in Phoenix, if you can believe it. I've been here almost 6 years now. And we've been working closely with all the founding farm families. As you know from my previous gig, that was what we did a lot. We had a lot of founding farm families to work with, and I have so enjoyed working with the property owners in this area and find them very willing and excited to see what's next for their property and for movement in the area. The development community is working closely on a number of site acquisitions in the area. So this isn't something that we're thinking about in the future. This is something that's happening right here yet today in takedowns of pretty significant sizes of property. From the vision from the city of Phoenix side, it's going to be critical to us that we keep this as an employment corridor. We want to make sure that the built environment is really is fully realized, that we're able to keep the jobs in the area and keep workforce in the area. That's really how we pay attention to those employment corridors and making sure you can really live and live and work right in those corridors, and then still constructing housing and amenities to support those employment corridors. And as I said, at ultimate build out, about 50 to 80,000 jobs are expected in this corridor. Mostly what I get asked, especially during our budget meetings, is where are retail amenities? All of the people that moved out to Levine during the last recession are now, we're now waiting for their retail amenities. And they are really, we talk about Phoenix is hot. Well, Levine is really heating up in retailers that are interested in moving out there. Today, we have about just over 2 million square feet in retail assets, with just over 600,000 added in the past years. That dominant intersection for years to come is going to be 59th Avenue and the new 202. That is, of course, Kitchell's Levine Park Place. Harkins Movie Theater has been announced as in planning at that location. Michael's and TJ Maxx are both just getting ready to open. In fact, I think they would have been open by now, but of course the pandemic has left some of the retailers, they're not as easy to travel to be able to get stores open. Sprouts did open. Kitchell does have letters of intent from a number of users for the pads. We'll see additional home decoration stores and clothing stores that announce on this site. But Kitchell's got quite a number of other users that they're working with in the area. On the other intersections of 59th Avenue and the 202, we've had other, other significant retail developments come along, and we'll be moving into construction probably later this year or in early 2021. If we look at our kind of that last intersection of the northeast corner of Baseline and 59th Avenue, you see some office development and additional restaurants and retail announced. So that hub of retail and the power centers for, at least for the foreseeable future, to support that employment corridor, like where my employees going to go to eat, where are they going to go to shop on their lunch hours, really will be Baseline and 59th Avenue. Come on, click forward. I'll just start talking and eventually the screen will pop up. The other thing that we're seeing in Levine is really, it used to be, when I first started in Phoenix and I would do the budget meetings in Levine, I would always get to them, don't you dare bring another pizza place into Levine. We're sick of pizza places. We're sick of fast food. And I would always tell them to quit eating pizza and fast food, and other things would come instead of what you're wanting. And we're finding Levine is really becoming this foodie scene now. The mass, the density and the availability of some of the retail establishments is creating a couple of great opportunities. And on that new South Mountain 202 corridor, we've got some of the most responded restaurants on Yelp that exist in the area, and we see some tremendous activity going on there. So on the next slide, it's a rather larger picture that Chris and I'll talk from, so it's going to take a second for it to come into focus. Come on. Away we go. So when most people look at what you see in front of you, they say, yep, that's a picture of a freeway and that's a lot of land. As we look at that, I see Phoenix over the next 20 or 25 years in building out jobs of the future and what is going to happen along this corridor, and really creating that place where companies want to grow, where companies want to thrive, and where they're going to expand. Chris, you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think one of the questions referenced TSMC, which I know we're under a pretty strict gag order on that, so we can't comment too deeply about it. But what we are seeing is we're having ongoing conversations with companies related and unrelated to that project, that because of the global notoriety of TSMC selecting the state in the region and the community, you're seeing us get garner global attention from other MEMS companies, other semiconductor related companies, other machine shop companies that support the sector. And so to Chris's point, Phoenix will naturally be a place that major capital investments, so really high capital asset company investments, will go because of the redundancy of the infrastructure, the growth that we've had from a population base, the quality of the labor pool, the pro-business environment led by the governor, the mayor's focus on our brand. All of those pieces go together. And so it's the irony to me as I look at this virgin land, as Chris is talking about, that it's amazing how quickly and I'll talk here in a minute about the number of projects that we have in our pipeline exceeds 200. And a majority of those are advanced manufacturers that are leaving higher tax, higher cost states, or they have growth. And that growth is no longer just defaulting to places like New York or California. They want to find other locations that, specifically manufacturing, where they can connect their supply chains, connect to quality labor pools. And in these kind of corridors, again, as I stated earlier, put us in an incredible position to win, because they're easy to manufacture products here. We're easy from a speed to market perspective, and then getting product into California is an easy half-day truck haul. So all these things are lining up for the region, again, as we come out of COVID, and I think, we still have some challenging times ahead, but our deck is really stacked with quality cards, and I'm convinced we're going to be able to play those over the next few years in a very favorable way.
Well, and want to kind of dovetail on what Chris is talking about on the infrastructure. One of the questions in the Q&A is about the redundancy of infrastructure. So SRP is planning for this to be an incredibly redundant power infrastructure in this area because of the types of companies that will be coming out. And the city is planning or has already installed in a number of areas a looped water and wastewater system so that if we have a failure on one side or if we reach capacity on one side, we can still accommodate for all of the users by just flipping a switch. So absolutely, this is an area probably even more critical than most areas of Phoenix that we'll see the redundancy of infrastructure. And then the other question that was just recently asked is, can we provide a copy of the slide deck? We'll turn this to PDF, absolutely. It's an incredibly large file that is pretty impossible to share. We struggled last night with getting it over, but I'll create it into a PDF and shoot it back over to Sheila, and she can absolutely share this out with membership. Happy to have that happen. So as we look at, we're going to go one more down and see if I can get it to advance. As we look at the future, you can kind of see that, oops, sorry, I went one up too many. So let me go one more back up. Oh, well, we'll skip over that one and just stay where we're at now. So when we look, oh yeah, sure, it's going to play games on me now. So as we look at that 202, as it moves all the way through that south side of Phoenix and looping the western part of Phoenix to the East Valley, so West Valley to East Valley, we are seeing commute times absolutely plummet. We know a lot of people that are using it, and a commute that they used to have that would take them an hour and 15 minutes to move through, they've shaved 30 or 45 minutes off of their commute. You can see by here, there's tremendous land opportunity that exists through the 202. And these are, for the most part, privately owned sites that are pretty easily assemblable. So as you look at, if you're looking and you can see my mouse moving, and you see kind of residential would go into the farther areas, but the areas that are along the 202, the areas that are in here are really protected as true employment corridors. Kind of down to the south, there's a big triangle, about a 300-acre triangle piece that's right along in here. These are protected for future employment here in the city of Phoenix. And as we look at as we look at kind of moving forward and really promoting Phoenix as that South Mountain Freeway to the preferred place to do business. So Chris and I are out on a constant basis, certainly not in the last 12 weeks, but prior to the last 12 weeks, out promoting all of Phoenix, and I mean Metro Phoenix, as a great place to do business. We work closely with a lot of site selectors and decision makers. And I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of talk about the GPEC strategy and how we partner together on getting messages out about the South Mountain Corridor and all of Metro Phoenix.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a number of channels that I was talking to my board this morning about the last recession. And as we were coming out of that last recession, the way we would have to go about targeting companies was like hand-to-hand combat. We would have to call them directly. We stood up a call center and we would be dialing for dollars. In today's environment with marketing automation and data science, you can deploy very targeted messaging to very targeted companies in certain geographies where we know based upon history where our best places to fish are. So across the different sales segmentation, you have direct, which we're doing a lot of that, as you can imagine, in California, in London, now certainly around the Asian market, around semiconductors. And we can go direct to companies with this immediate messaging about the value proposition by sector. And then you have what we have on the screen here, the site selection consultants, which there's roughly about 600 of them nationally, but really about 30 to 40 of them control 90% of the deal flow that happens. And so we spent a lot of time with those 30 to 40 explaining soup to nuts, not only our service model, but the depth of every value prop we have, from cybersecurity to advanced manufacturing to e-commerce, so that if any one of these companies or consultants gets a call from one of their Fortune 1000 companies and they say, we're looking at a West Coast location, we want Greater Phoenix on the map. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, is direct marketing, multiplier marketing. And what you're going to see from us going forward, as part of an economic acceleration plan, is what I mentioned earlier, this kind of return to America in some form, where there's going to be massive amounts of risk assessments taking place from corporations, trying to figure out, do they want to take on the geopolitical risk of continuing manufacturing in these foreign markets that have risk, or will they consider moving back to the US or to Mexico or Canada? And so part of our messaging globally is how do we unite these 3 North American markets to compete together? So that Mexico is a partner in this. And the long-term trends that I foresee is that Arizona, California, Northern Mexico, the supply chains that exist now, you're going to see, cooperative efforts underway or in the future, to really position this market and all the vast advantages that these areas have. So we're going to be as aggressive as ever as we come out of the COVID crisis with messaging, because as I talked about, Phoenix as a region and as a market is on everyone's radar. 10 years ago, if you remember, rewind the tape a bit, we were coming off of the worst recession in history of Arizona. We were also dealing with 1070, where you had a lot of individuals vacating the state and having tourism impacting our economic position. And so it was almost like, we had a longer tail of recovery. This one still is uncertain as to the recovery, but the brand that we have as a region and as a state is so much stronger than it was 10 years ago. So I am optimistic about our near-term outcomes, and we'll continue working diligently to make sure that the value proposition of our region, our state, are strong.
Well, and I think too, to go on with what Chris is saying there, if you saw the numbers, the census numbers that were released this morning, Phoenix is for the 4th year in a row the fastest growing city in the country. We've added more than 240,000 people just since 2010. So it's a market that people are selecting to live in. And the other thing that happened this morning when the numbers were released is that the Phoenix metro area is now a bit larger than the greater Boston area. So we've moved into the number 10 role of size in growth. And when you look at the pandemic that we're in now, and Chris and I talk about this a lot, companies are making decisions as to where they're going to go, but a workforce is also reevaluating and looking at where they want to live. Imagine that you've now been cooped up for 12 weeks on the 50th floor of a high rise in New York with 2 kids, and you don't have a balcony and you've not been allowed outside. You really start to rethink that quality of life and where you'd like to be. And Chris and I joke that this will be the first time ever in Arizona's history that our urban sprawl is a positive thing and viewed as a positive instead of a negative. So I think you're going to see Arizona come out of this in a better and stronger fashion because of really smart decisions that have been made, and because it still is a place where that quality workforce wants to live. And I think we're going to recover a little bit faster than others are recovering. One of the questions that's in the chat right now is that they've heard that that Secretary Ross with the U.S. Department of Commerce has been looking at welcoming internationally based companies back into the U.S. We've been reading about all that and working towards that. The Arizona Commerce Authority and GPEC have had a lead role in those conversations. And I know Sandra Watson, who's the CEO of the Commerce Authority, has had extensive conversations with federal delegation and with those thought leaders, as has Chris Camacho, in just talking about making sure Arizona, as those conversations happen, that Arizona's top of mind. So as we move forward, this is kind of the end of our slide deck, and Chris and I are here to answer any questions that you might have as we look to move forward certainly in all of Metro Phoenix. For me, particularly Phoenix, and one of my favorite areas, the South Mountain Technology Corridor. You will not recognize this corridor in the next 5 years. This will be an area that is so vastly different, with new job growth and new development in the area. As I said, Phoenix, this is where Phoenix wants to see a lot of its future development. We already have kind of a protocol and a framework to follow in getting infrastructure into the area. I know kind of those first guys in, it's always a little bit challenging to be first into a new employment corridor. But I'm here to tell you that for the right projects and to ensure those job generating of the future, Phoenix is here to help any way that we can. And we'd love to talk to you about what infrastructure looks like and how we can connect you with the owners of the property. And excited to continue this conversation, and hope you're all staying safe.
Chris and Chris, thank you very much for for that presentation. That's remarkable. I looked at my list of questions I didn't get to ask because apparently I went away. And you answered all of them, but I wanted to see, there are some questions coming in. I don't know, can you see the webinar chat questions, Chris and Chris?
Yeah, I think we've answered all of them. We've been going down them as we've been going along. And
there's a new question from Stephen Gregg that's come in. Has there been any collaboration with the Native American community for employment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go first and then I'll turn it over to Chris. So absolutely, the Gila River Indian community is an absolute critical partner for us along the 202 and in lots of other things that we do. They're a tremendous partner for us in working and bringing in jobs and working in supporting workforce and in infrastructure. So our mayor and city council have a great relationship with the governor and his council members. So we do have a really strong working relationship, whether it's on a land planning side or on a visionary kind of future side.
The only thing I would add is I'm excited for the Native American community, specifically on the southern portion of that 202 connection, whereby when these transportation corridors get set, that breeds and leads to economic development strategy. And so this is going to be really important for the community there to not only work with City of Phoenix, but other partners, because that will open up a new phenomenon of economic development opportunity, not only for the tribal members, but also those in and around that particular corridor. So again, I think it's going to promote more unity, and it's already been positive engagement, as Chris alluded to, but this will just enhance those relationships going forward.
We've had a couple other questions in here. I want to just bring this up, and I think we'll probably address it at a different time with a different presentation. Chris Mackey's comment about urban sprawl being a truly beneficial thing, and its potential impact on low-income individuals. I think Chris's comment was specifically related to COVID and the spreading of the density. So I think there is some information we need to address, but I think that's a different program. And then there's another question from Brian about, does Phoenix have marketing materials for the SMTC above and beyond the stack?
Absolutely, and we can get those over to you. We've got some great marketing materials that goes in depth on the utilities and the availability of land and those, and we'll shoot them over to Sheila to get out to the people on the call.
Hey, Chris, I have a question for you. Has there been a lot of land changing hands in this corridor, or industrial zone lands? I've heard there, back and forth a lot about that, but I'm just curious kind of what that picture looks like in terms of land ownership.
Yep, so we've seen a few of the land sites already trade hands to some of the bigger players. We've got a very significant parcel that is in escrow and under its due diligence right now that would really be a game changer for us. So we're working closely with the group. There are probably 3 or 4 pretty significant parcels that have been acquired in the last few months that are moving forward on industrial and commercial development.
We have another question here from Craig Reese about what has changed since the COVID-19 has started to affect business. Are you guys feeling that this is going to have a longer term impact at this point? And then a comment about it seems that traffic is increasing each day, which is something I'm witnessing as well. And then the fact that Southwest just saw more reservations versus cancellations this week. So what is your overall impression, and especially where Phoenix is positioned and the Phoenix metro area is positioned in coming out of the COVID?
Yeah, so I'll give comments first, and then Chris, obviously feel free to jump in on this. So I think anyone that believes that we're back to normal in a short-term window is a bit naive. I think the economists I'm talking to, and this is a national phenomenon, but the resulting slow demand curve, meaning markets are reopening, whether it's, again, churches, it's retail, it's restaurants, and how important retail spending is to our local coffers and state coffers. Consumer confidence is not there yet. And that's if you believe that we won't see massive increases in COVID and hospitalization rates, then the numbers we're looking at is this is likely some level of U-shaped recovery instead of V-shaped. And the question is really about, is this, an elongated U with a low trough for a fair amount, a couple quarters, or is it a short U, meaning we crashed quickly with the job market losses and we begin to see the swing on the other side. So that remains to be seen, but different from '08 where you had systemic financial challenges, this is a healthcare crisis which drew closure, which then impacted, consumer and psychological confidence in spending. And so what's going to be really important is really the next quarter's worth of consumer spending. And if that gets quote unquote back on track, remotely back on track, we will recover. And every market's going to deal with this, not just Phoenix. But I also think that, again, as I said earlier, from outside of that one narrowed demand curve issue, Phoenix is well situated from an infrastructure, a tailwind. People want to move here. All those other things that a lot of the Rust Belt states and even California, I think you're going to see continued leakage of population and jobs, where we're going to win that battle, I do believe, in the long term. But short term, I still think when I talk to small businesses, they're still in survival mode. So my PSA would be go support local businesses as much as you can. We should be doing this all the time, but specifically now, these are the small businesses that really need help, and spend money with them the best you can.
Yeah, because Chris is exactly right. We, by our estimates in what we're working with, and at the end of March, I redeployed my entire team to start making calls out to all 18,000 Phoenix businesses. And to date, we've actually connected with more than 10,000 of them in just the last, just since March 30th. And they're telling us what's happening and what's needed. And just from those conversations, the data that we're seeing nationally, the work we're doing with Chris, we think we could lose, as many as 20% of our small businesses, maybe even 25% of our small businesses through this, because it's not over. This isn't just because we've started reopening. Those businesses have to get up and ramping, and people have to have confidence in the market again. We have 500,000 people who are either are unemployed, or they're laid off, or something. We've got to get them back to work. So this is not a sprint. This is going to take us quite some time to work our way. What happened here? If you think about those 500,000, on a good year, Arizona adds between 80 and 100,000 jobs in any given year. So when you think about the 6 weeks of loss, if none of those businesses come back, which they will, they absolutely will, but if they didn't, it'll take us 6 years to put back the number of jobs that we lost in 6 weeks.
I have a question about, this kind of dovetails on with Eric Anderson, who will be joining us again on June 18th for a webinar. Thank you for Eric. I think he was on this webinar today. Because both of you always continue to look forward. I know neither of you is happy with stagnation. We look at the 202 as a major accomplishment, as a major technology corridor. What is the next corridor? We have SR30 potentially, which is a major linkage to the west. What are some of the other things that you see on the horizon that are significant for growth in the city of Phoenix and the Phoenix metro area?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I'm looking forward to that 606 that's coming online in 20. I'm kidding. I don't know if there's a 606 planned. I do think SR30 opens up unique opportunities that, again, I always find this fascinating when I talk to transportation leaders like Eric and others, and I think Chris showed this. It's like, this is 30 years in the making, and these are long-term planned corridors, but it's hard to wrap your head around. And I'm sure 30 years ago, when people said we should have this corridor in place, as a pass around downtown, that this would be needed. I'm sure there were a lot of questions at that point with the population. But I look at, even corridors. I know I-11 is another one on the west side that's intending to connect to the Nevada market. So Nevada market to Phoenix, and Canada all the way to Mexico. I think these other arterials are also going to be really important in that, we've done a good job with the regional grid. And I know that in the next 3 years, we're going to have a big decision as to whether we want to extend and or increase the Prop 400 half-cent sales tax as it's currently being proposed. And GPEC's been a big proponent of transportation infrastructure, because that's the backbone or the lifeblood of our existence, is making sure we can move people. And this is a great example of how transportation leads to economic development. But I do think SR30, I do think arterials off of ability to connect east to west are also going to be critical outside of the I-10 corridor, just because there's still a massive amount of people that move east to west in the morning. So those would be a couple reactions that I would have. And I'm sure Chris is even closer to some of the city level interests.
And I'd like to even step it back one level from what Chris is talking about for corridor, and that's the Rio Reimagined. So as we, you've got the Salt River that kind of acts as a scar through Metro Phoenix, and ASU has been in a leadership role with 5 city mayors and economic developers to really replan for how we can fix that wide swath of transportation moving throughout the valley. And Tempe has done an incredible job. They did an absolutely amazing job in a leadership role of creating Tempe Town Lake. And we've seen what happens when you start to reactivate those failed areas. We'll all remember that those were, heavy, heavy industrial sites. They were landfills. It was rough area. And what they've done is absolutely amazing. And I think as you look at the rest of the city, whether it's Mesa or Phoenix or Avondale or Buckeye, as you continue to move west, is those swaths of land that were, have been landfills, or they've been, been kind of a really rough and tumble areas. I think over the next decade, you're going to see those come back into major employment corridors, major community benefits, major open space, and resolving. We've got a couple of projects, one in particular that will be moving forward in Phoenix as part of Senator McCain's vision in the Rio Reimagined, and bringing an incredible project online that we'll be ready to announce this fall. And of course, and I can't ever help myself but saying, of course, on the future light rail, as we move light rail through South Central, is kind of re-envisioning how the community wants to see their area develop, and bringing the benefits to the community that they've long wanted through that transportation corridor that is light rail.
So this is Eric Anderson. I think Sheila unmuted my phone, so I'm going to jump in here. Thank you all for the shout outs to Mag. We think transportation obviously is a really important ingredient to our quality of life.
Did we lose Eric?
I think we did.
I think we lost him.
He got remuted.
Hang on.
Oh,
there we go.
There
Can you hear me now? Sorry, all
Yes.
of a sudden I lost Zoom and it just came back. So, hey, but transportation is extremely important. State Route 30 is our next big project. I'm going to start my video here. Hang on. See how that turns out. How about that? I even have a interchange in the background. How about that? So anyway, State Route 30 is our next big project in the Southwest Valley. Extremely important to unclog I-10 in the West Valley. Open up other opportunities, although I don't think we're going to see the kind of large vacant parcels that we have along the South Mountain corridor, but certainly will make a big improvement. Chris mentioned the light rail extension down Central Avenue. That's under construction now. That's also going to be a game changer. So we're going to continue to press forward with transportation. Sheila put up the announcement for next month's seminar or webinar on using transportation unlock trap value. We've done some pretty interesting analysis in terms of where jobs are located relative to freeways and light rail. And also looking at the change in land values as you move away from these corridors. Very interesting information. So tune in for that one. Thank you.
We're looking forward to that. Again, that's June 18th. Sheila's put up on the screen the information about that. We'd love for everybody to join us for that Zoom meeting. We have another question. I think it'd be good to. It's probably our last question. And I think before I ask this, I think it'd be good. I'm seeing a little bit of a trend here. The question is, how will the surge and industrialization of these areas contribute to gentrification, and what measures are taken for cultural preservation? I think we actually probably need to think about an LAI discussion about urbanization and gentrification and certainly the impacts of a growing economy. So I appreciate people bringing that up. Is there, as part of the development of the 202, I think that component of cultural preservation is, that was accounted for. Do you all have an answer or some things that we can look at for that?
So when you look at the freeway itself for Levine, and I couldn't agree with you more. When you look at cultural preservation, when you look at the duty that we have to all communities to ensure that they have a quality place to live and a quality place to work and easy transportation, not just to certain segments, but to all segments of our population. And you look at that Levine freeway and workforce housing, and being able to bring jobs to people who went out into Levine 10 years ago expecting one thing, or 20 years ago expecting another thing, and making sure that we are always listening to what the citizens want and what's important to them. What can we bring into the community from an economic development standpoint that will benefit them, that'll make them happy, is what we work diligently towards. When you look at kind of the South Central Light Rail, it was years of community meets and trying to build trust and make sure that they don't think that what we've done in downtown is what's going to happen on the South Road. Because that's what everyone thought, is that what we've done in downtown is what's going to continue south on Central Avenue, and it's not. It's about creating a place where we can make transportation corridors that people don't have cars. They've got one car and two working members of the family that they can get where they need to easily, but bringing the amenities to them. When they go shopping or restaurants or jobs, where can we bring those to? Then when you look at the cultural amenities along the 202 corridor, it was working closely with both our partners at the Gila River Indian community, but also with the founding families of Levine, and that real focus that they have on wanting to make sure that they still have that agriculture feel. They still have that more open and less urban feel. That's what Levine's all about, and it's crazy cool. You're out on some of these large land sites, and you are at the base of these absolutely stunningly gorgeous South Mountains. The second largest park in the entire country at 16,000 acres, and yet you're looking out over downtown Phoenix and all the high rises. It kind of gets your mind in this odd position. You turn one way and it's one thing, one way and it's another. And protecting South Mountain and protecting those parks and making sure that open space and the cultural amenities and the historic preservation of those mountainous park stays is critically important to us.
Great. I wanted to give Loretta Flick one more chance to our sponsor for today's webinar, if she had any other thoughts for today. Said here she was going
to. I should just unmute myself. I just wanted to say Cardinal's happy to sponsor an event with you. I'm LAI, and I hope that others would consider, as a board member of LAI, I would encourage others to, think about sponsoring our events.
Thank you, Loretta. Yeah, think about sponsoring and certainly think about joining Lambda Alpha International. It's a tremendous organization. We bring discussions such as this to a wide variety of folks in the real estate profession, and we certainly welcome the opportunity to bring in some more folks into to the organization. With that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris Mackey and Chris Camacho. It was exceptional as always. You've shown us that we can always expect that. So we should never get anything but exceptionalism from you two, which we certainly haven't yet. And feel free, if anybody has any further questions, certainly reach out to me. But I think we're going to be getting the presentation up on the Lambda Alpha website. And again, thank you very much for participating and joining us.
Thank you for having us.